it is my distinct pleasure to ask Professor O'Leary to grace us with her reflections on a career. Kim?
Thank you, James. And I want to give a really thank Dean and President James McGrath and Bill Arnold for asking me if I would do this. If you've been teaching as long as I have, and I got out the calculator today, and it's been exactly 40 years since I graduated from law school. 34 of those years have been spent teaching. The opportunity to sort of share a last lecture was seemed like way too much fun to pass up. So I very much enjoyed sort of thinking about it and preparing for it. And hopefully I have something of value to pass along before I sit back and sip my sangria with my husband here in Lisbon. Bill mentioned that it is a little bit later here. It's 10:30. 5 p.m. in Lisbon, and but because this was an alumni event, he obviously wanted to schedule it in the evening, and I totally understood that. So here, I've been here since the middle of January, and we are going to be here for a few more weeks before heading to London, traveling sort of for the foreseeable future. So without further ado, let me get started. All right. Okay, there we go. So I just wanted to start by saying, if I'm reflecting on a career, maybe not everybody in the room, although I see so many former students and colleagues and friends and family, and that's really cool. It's wonderful to see your names and faces. But I wanted to just give you, this is sort of the resume view of what my career actually has been. Went to college and I graduated in 1979 in Oberlin, Ohio, graduated Northeastern Law School in Boston, 1982. And then I went into law practice. My mother was a lawyer, a fairly well-known civil rights attorney, and I worked in her office, not for very long because to be honest, I didn't want to live in Oakland City, Indiana, a town of 3,000 people. Then went to legal services in Indiana. And then in 1988, which really changed the shape of my career, that's when I started teaching. And I was at IU Indianapolis, then the University of Dayton, before coming to Cooley in 2000. And, I think when my husband and I started talking about it was time for us to go somewhere, like be somewhere else, it was when I realized that I'd been in Michigan for 21 years, which is by far the longest that we've lived anywhere, I think, in my entire life. So, that says a lot, actually, for the faculty and students and staff at Cooley that went by so quickly. And now I'm into the sort of fourth box, retirement, which is this nomadic lifestyle, as I mentioned, doing everything that I do, doing remotely, and getting to pick the things that you most enjoy doing. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But one of the things, issues with the advance. One of the things I wanted to mention is that, there's the resume version, and then there are a whole lot of, I was thinking about it, lots of other little things that you do. For example, one summer when I was in college, I had a civil service summer job, the assistant to the director of personnel of a federal agency, which turned out to be enormously helpful to me then in the late 80s and early 90s when I was managing staff in a legal services office, and then when I was at the University of Dayton and Cooley directing a law clinic. And so part of what I want to say is, and I put some things in here, when I worked for my mother, I learned a lot about federal procedure and, civil rights, constitutional law, doctrinal law. But the thing that probably made the most impact on me was hearing the individual client stories of discrimination. And I sat in on many, many, many meetings of women and people of color who were being discriminated against. And it was really those stories that shaped me for the rest of my career. So I just want to say that all kinds of things that you do that don't show up on the resume often turn out to be incredibly important. Okay, so I promised you 5 lessons. So this is a little tantalizing. Here are the 5 lessons. Lesson number one, don't be afraid to have original ideas. One of the things I have noticed throughout my career is that often I've reached a place where I thought I was sort of missing something. And I'll give you, I have a couple of examples. I don't need to go through all of them, but one of them that always pops into my head is the first time I was at the University of Dayton. I was teaching, interviewing, going to teach interviewing and counseling. I got materials from somebody at American University. It was very generous, sharing me all kinds of simulations and some other folks. But I kept saying, well, where are the materials for lawyers who don't represent individual clients? You know, all the materials were one lawyer, one client. And I'm thinking there's all kinds of lawyers, government lawyers and lawyers who represent nonprofits and corporate lawyers, right, who don't represent individual clients. Where's the material on this? So I started calling people that I knew at all kinds of different law schools, and I kept getting the same answer. There aren't any materials on this. And so, you know, I guess part of my point is I thought I was just missing something. And it seems like every time I've had what I could claim to be an original idea, it's usually me starting by me thinking I'm missing something. So don't get me wrong. Lawyers do a lot of things from templates. They call other lawyers, they get examples, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's absolutely an appropriate way to practice law. But sometimes somebody hasn't done something that needs to be done. And so don't be afraid of that. People are always looking for how did somebody else do it, but sometimes your idea may be the best idea in the room. And these are some of the examples of places where this has come up in my career. When at one point I remember again calling people and saying, so how do I figure out the quality of the legal work that I'm doing in my law clinic? And people are like, well, what do you mean? You figure out the quality of your student work by supervising them. And I'm like, no, I mean the quality of my work, like my office's work. How do we figure that out? And what I heard was, like, nobody's doing that, except for, I will give a shout out to DCL School of Law, Shelley Broderick. She knew what I was talking about. And about 6 months later, we had a panel at a national conference on that topic. Again, just coming from the question. Outcomes and clinics. I just went around and talked to everybody I worked with in the clinic and said, what do you want your students to be able to do? And we wrote it down rather than looking it up somewhere else. What I think of as real skill integration in contracts and property, really integrating the skill and the doctrine in a very sort of seamless way, holistic way. And then the multicultural lawyering, the seminar and the book, again, me sort of figuring out, you know, where is that book? Well, oh, there isn't one. I guess we're going to have to write it. So don't be afraid to have original ideas. That's lesson number one. Lesson number two, I can't take credit for coming up with this. I'm actually going to credit two different sources. The lesson is focus on one thing at a time. And here's my professional career credit. One of my most important mentors in my career is a retired professor by the name of Vernelia Randall. And when I first went to Dayton, Vernelia was a tenure track professor there. And it seemed to me like she was always getting invited to speak at things or write things like for publications. And I said, how do you do that? And she said, you focus on one thing at a time. And so she said, I can tell you're somebody with many interests. I am too. But at any point in your career, pick one thing. And if you can teach an elective related to that, say yes. If you can accept a conference presentation related to that, or a committee with the bar related to that, or some kind of writing related to that, say yes. And in a fairly short period of time, people will think of you as a person associated with that thing. So let me show you the list of the one thing in sequence. I sat down the other day. This is my list of the one thing I focused on at a time. Um, so yeah, it's a pretty big list, right? I mean, when I was working with my mother, it was civil rights and free speech law first, just the law. I didn't know the law. Then federal procedure and drafting. Then I went to legal services and I had to learn family law and housing law. When I went into teaching, I spent a good probably 2, 3 years just trying to figure out how to supervise students at a clinic. And then I started really doing reading, very serious reading on poverty, feminism, and cultural intelligence. I shifted into everything I could think about how to do teach interviewing and counseling. And I did that for a good 6 or 7 years. And then when I started teaching in an elder law clinic, I had to learn elder law. So that was my focus. That shifted into ethics and elder law, where I wrote some publications. And then I had a major shift again in 2016, 17 into teaching first year courses. So I had to learn contracts, I had to learn property, but I also had to learn, which came after that. First was the substance, right? Then it was learning science. And then it was very quickly online teaching. And then the full scale skills integration. And then sort of the last big project, the big one thing I've been doing the last few years is multicultural lawyering. But I say that to say that I know a lot of you in this room and you all have many interests. But focusing on that one thing really helps pull together. And you can see how these things build on each other too, right? Each one and sort of helps inform the next. And so the other thing I wanted to mention is that then in addition to building my own skills, which is really the main purpose of this, each of these led to conference presentations, articles, in-service trainings, task forces, books, right? So this is how you build a reputation. Maybe in a lot of different things, but only one at a time. Now, I said I was going to credit this to 2 people. When I was doing a dry run of this presentation, my husband said to me, well, I've been telling you this for years to focus on one thing. And he's right, he has. More probably in the personal realm, not to try to do 17 errands between when I leave for work and come home. But one thing at a time. So I will also give credit to him for the one thing at a time. Lesson number 3, I think, should be probably something all of us who landed in academia as a career would embrace. But I think just also as a lawyer, this is sort of part of the job. So if you don't like learning, you're not going to like being a lawyer, and you're certainly not going to like being an academic. Lesson number 3, don't stop learning. And I think the main idea for this, for me, is stretching myself. So you could see with my list of those one things that as you get into each thing, you're sort of learning something new. But I think when this lesson hit me maybe in the most powerful way was in 2016, 17, 18, when I went overseas to direct the foreign study program in Australia and New Zealand. And I started meeting academics over there, and we started sharing ideas, and I just started learning again almost about legal systems. I was going to classes and just sitting in with the students because it was so interesting to learn so many different things. Indigenous culture and civil procedure and so on. I mean, the list just went on and on and on. And that's when I realized, sort of when I came home, that some of the stuff I had been doing, I was starting to feel like I was phoning it in. I had been doing the same thing for so long that something was telling me it's time to expand, right? It's time to start learning some new things. And then that's when I shifted into the first year curriculum. And again, very grateful for the administrative folks at Cooley, Chris Church in particular, who allowed me to do that, to make that shift. Because, a lot of people want to put you in a box. Oh, you're the clinician, or you're the skills person. And, there were some people who had enough faith that I could make that shift. I think the other thing to say is that we live in a world that requires constant upgrades, right? You are not going to be, if you have the same skills even 5 years from now, you're going to be behind, right? You need to keep kind of looking around, opening your eyes. What do we need to learn? This was a big lesson to all of us that shifted to online so quickly, right? Online teaching and learning, right? And I would say usually this is fun, but it's hard work. Learning new things, really new things, is really hard work. Which gave me, when I started teaching contracts and property, especially, a lot of empathy for our students, because everything they're learning is new, and it's hard. It's hard work, but it pays off, and it's fun. And I also like to mention, because I'm 64, studies are showing relationships between actively learning new things and warding off cognitive decline. So I'm trying to learn a song in Portuguese right now. This is, part of that effort. All right. Okay, lesson 4, find the joy. Now, again, I have to go back to my mentor, Vernelia, on this one. This one came to me. I had been asked by a former dean, he's no longer at Cooley, Associate Dean Ann Wood, to take on a dean position. And it was something I thought I would be good at. It had to do with outcomes and learning and programs related to clinics and skills. And I thought, yeah, I'd be good at that. And so I kind of had tentatively said yes. And I had all these people in the clinic who were like, no, you don't want to leave. No, don't do that. And, I had Anne and some other people saying, yeah, you do. You want to do this. So I called Vernelia, my mentor, who didn't have a dog in the fight, right? She was at a different school, and she wouldn't have had an opinion one way or the other. And I said, I'm not sure what to do. I think I'm really good at this. But I don't know if it's the right fit for me. And she said, I want you to sit down and make a list of the things in your work that bring you joy. And I said, I never thought to even ask that question. And so I made my list. And what I realized when I looked at my list is that none of the things on the joy list were part of this administrative position. None of them. It was writing. It was interacting with students on a regular basis, right? It was there were a lot of things, and none of them were on that list. And so I ended up I remember calling Ian and saying, I'm sorry, but I have to turn this down. And that was right. That was the right choice for me at the time. But the idea of framing it that way, nobody else had said it that way to me. What brings you joy? And look for this in your work, because you can shape your work to the things you enjoy doing, not all the time, not 100% of the time, but the more you shape it, and ask these questions. What do I love to do? How can I do more of it? Who do I love to spend time with? I really love to collaborate, but I pick collaborators carefully, because you spend a lot of time with your collaborators. So who do I love to spend time with? And this, I wanted to mention, applies at work and at home. So what am I doing in my retirement? I'm working on the few projects I really care about related to multicultural lawyering and learning pedagogy. And I'm traveling, and I'm playing the ukulele, and I'm spending time with my husband. So to me, this is where finding the joy is sort of the payoff in my retirement. But my point is, you can do this all the way through if you look for it and you shape things that shape, again, not 100%. We all have things at our job we don't like to do, but you can look to shape and look for opportunities to create more opportunities to do these things that bring you joy. Lesson number 5 is listen and connect wherever you are. And I know some of you in this room, I'm looking at some of your faces on my screen, and I know some of you are really good at this. In fact, I would venture to say that most Cooley people are good at connecting, I think, maybe more so than a lot of other institutions where I've been. But not just connect, but listen is really important. So, I think this has always been, I come from professionally a background where clinical people get together and know each other and talk with each other and share ideas. And that was a world of fascinating people. And I went to, at each school I've been, but I would have to say, I think at Cooley, maybe a little more so, really fascinating people I enjoy being around and talking to, sharing ideas with. When I went overseas on foreign study, another set of fascinating people. the key is to slow yourself down and listen to them. As lawyers, we often spend most of our time talking and not so much time listening. And so listening to these fascinating people, take time to understand and honor your own culture and traditions. Take the time to understand and honor the culture and traditions of people who are different from you, and learn to empathize. And, if this sounds a little bit like what some of you have heard me talk about our multicultural lawyering class, that's very intentional, right? That's, to me, a big lesson of my career was that taking the time to teach and learn about these empathy, to build the empathy and learn about different cultures and traditions is vitally important, I think, to our world, and for problem solving, and which is why this beautiful graphic that a fellow at Carolina Academic Press drew of our book cover is gracing this slide. So my last point, which is just a riff off of number 5, is to, once you build connections, stay connected. We live in a time where it is so easy to stay connected. We got to know the people in Australia and New Zealand, and several of them have been regular guest speakers in our seminar. This is a time where we can continue to be in contact with people. So I want to give you ways you can stay in contact with me. My husband and I have launched a blog called Rocinante's on the Road. And if you don't know the illusion, Rocinante was the name of Don Quixote's horse, who was an old, broken down workhorse, but Don Quixote thought of him as a noble, valiant steed. And so that's how we see ourselves. We're not out to pasture yet. So we just started this blog. Feel free to follow our journey, or leave comments or whatever you would like. I'm also on Facebook, just under Kimberly O'Leary. I'm on LinkedIn under Kimberly O'Leary. And I am contributing about once a month a blog to the Cooley Law Blogspot on the theme of multicultural lawyering. So those are all ways that you can stay connected with me. And with that, I have finished my final lecture.